The whispers followed Matilda Byrne like vultures circling a wounded animal as she entered the dance hall in Silver Creek, Colorado. The year was 1883, and in a town where everyone knew everyone's business, Matilda's recent past hung around her neck like a noose. Her blue calico dress, patched but clean, did little to disguise the tremble in her hands as she pressed them against her skirt. "Can you believe she had the nerve to show her face here?" A woman's voice hissed, just loud enough for Matilda to hear, after what happened with the banker's son. "She's ruined goods now," another replied. Matilda lifted her chin, fighting back tears. At 22, she had already endured more scandal than most women twice her age. The accusations weren't true. Frederick Whitmore had forced himself on her and then claimed she'd seduced him when his father caught them. But in Silver Creek, a woman's word meant nothing against that of the town's wealthiest family. She took a deep breath and moved toward a corner of the room, away from the stares and whispers. The monthly town dance was the only social event in Silver Creek, and despite everything, Matilda couldn't bear another Saturday night alone in the small room she rented above the millinery shop where she worked. Across the room, Samuel Calloway leaned against the wall, nursing a glass of whiskey. At 28, he had already made a name for himself as one of the most skilled horse trainers in the territory. His ranch outside of town was modest but growing, thanks to his uncanny ability to tame even the wildest mustangs. Samuel's dark hair curled at his collar, and his face, tanned from long days under the Colorado sun, was set in thoughtful lines as he observed the room. His eyes landed on Matilda, standing alone while couples twirled around the floor. He'd heard the rumors about her, of course everyone had. But Samuel Calloway had never been one to put much stock in town gossip. He watched as Mrs. Norwood, the banker's wife, deliberately turned her back on Matilda when she approached the refreshment table. "Poor thing," said Thomas Reed, the blacksmith, following Samuel's gaze. "Town's been mighty cruel to her since that business with young Whitmore." "What's the truth of it?" Samuel asked, his voice low. Thomas shrugged. "Only two people know for certain, but I'll tell you this: I've known Matilda Byrne since she was knee-high to a grasshopper." "Never known her to lie, not once." Samuel nodded, his jaw tightening as he observed three young women pointing at Matilda and giggling behind their fans. He drained his glass and set it on a nearby table with determination. Matilda was considering slipping out the back door when a deep voice spoke from beside her. "Would you care to dance, Miss Byrne?" She looked up, startled to find Samuel Calloway standing before her, his hand extended. She glanced around, certain he must be addressing someone else. "Me?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the fiddle music. "I don't see any other Miss Byrne here," he replied with a slight smile. Matilda hesitated. "Mr. Calloway, I'm not sure that's wise. People will talk." "People always talk," he said with a shrug. "But I came here to dance, and you look like you could use a partner." The music shifted to a waltz, and Matilda felt every eye in the room on her as she placed her hand in Samuel's. He led her to the middle of the floor, his hand firm but gentle at her waist. "You dance well," she said after a moment, surprised by his grace. "My mother insisted all her sons learn, said no woman would have us otherwise," he replied with a wry smile. "Though I'm not sure it did much good, still a bachelor at my age." "You're hardly ancient," Matilda said, feeling herself relax slightly as they moved across the floor. "Ancient enough in these parts. Most men my age have a wife and half a dozen children by now." The music swelled, and Samuel guided her through a turn. Matilda was acutely aware of the stares, the whispers behind hands. Mrs. Whitmore's face was a mask of disapproval, while her husband, the banker, looked as though he'd bitten into something sour. "They're all watching us," she murmured. "Let them," Samuel replied, his voice firm. "You've done nothing to be ashamed of." Matilda nearly missed a step. "You don't know that. I know enough," he said simply. As the dance ended, Samuel didn't release her hand immediately. "Would you like some punch?" he asked. Before Matilda could answer, Eliza Whitmore, Frederick's sister, brushed past them, deliberately knocking into Matilda's shoulder. "Oh, Mr. Calloway," Eliza said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I had no idea you were so charitable. Dancing with the town tramp must be good for your soul." Matilda's face burned with humiliation, but before she could retreat, Samuel's hand tightened around hers. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice cool and measured, "I suggest you mind your manners. Miss Byrne is a lady, which is more than I can say for someone who speaks as you just did." Eliza's mouth fell open in shock. No one in Silver Creek dared to speak to a Whitmore that way. "Well, perhaps you should," Samuel interrupted. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe I promised Miss Byrne some punch." He led Matilda away, leaving Eliza sputtering behind them. As they reached the refreshment table, Matilda finally found her voice. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "The Whitmores have influence in this town. They could make trouble for you." Samuel handed her a cup of punch, his expression unconcerned. "I've never been one to worry much about what people like the Whitmores think." "That's because you've never been on the wrong side of them," Matilda replied softly. Samuel studied her face, noting the shadows beneath her blue eyes, the wariness that no young woman should have to carry. "Would you tell me what really happened?" he asked quietly. "If you want to, that is." Matilda glanced around the room, aware of the curious eyes still watching them. "Not here," she said. "But thank you for the dance, Mr. Calloway. It was kind of you." "Samuel," he corrected. "And it wasn't kindness, Miss Byrne. I wanted to dance with you." For the first time that evening, Matilda smiled, a small, hesitant thing, but genuine. "Matilda," she offered in return. "Matilda," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "Would you permit me to see you home tonight?" She hesitated, weighing the consequences. Being seen with Samuel would only fuel more gossip, but the thought of his steady presence beside her as she walked through town was too comforting to refuse. "Yes," she said finally. "I would like that." They danced twice more that evening, and each time Matilda felt the weight of judgment ease just a little. Samuel's hand at her waist was respectful, his conversation genuine. He told her about his ranch, about the wild stallion he was currently trying to gentle, and asked her questions about her work at the millinery shop. As the evening drew to a close, Samuel collected his hat and offered Matilda his arm. They stepped out into the cool night air, the stars brilliant above the small town. "It's not far," Matilda said as they began walking. "Just past the general store." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before Samuel spoke. "I meant what I said earlier. I'd like to know what happened, if you're willing to tell me." Matilda took a deep breath. No one had actually asked for her side of the story before they'd all simply believed what Frederick claimed. "I was working late at the shop," she began, her voice quiet. "Mr. Whitmore, the elder, had ordered a special hat for his wife's birthday, and I was finishing the trimming. Frederick came in, said he was passing by and saw the light." She paused, gathering her courage. "He'd been attentive before, bringing me flowers, waiting for me after work. I tried to be polite but distant. I wasn't interested." Samuel nodded, listening intently as they walked slowly through the quiet streets. "That night, he'd been drinking. He wouldn't take no for an answer. Her voice caught. He forced himself on me. I fought, but he was stronger. His father came looking for him and found us. Frederick immediately claimed I'd lured him there, that I'd been trying to seduce him for weeks." She laughed bitterly. "As if I'd want anything to do with a man like that." Samuel's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice gentle. "And people believed him." "Of course they did. He's Frederick Whitmore. I'm just the milliner's assistant whose parents died of influenza 3 years ago. I have no family, no money, no standing in this town. Who would believe me?" They had reached the millinery shop, a small clapboard building with living quarters above. Matilda turned to face Samuel, expecting to see pity or, worse, doubt in his eyes. Instead, she saw anger not directed at her but on her behalf. "I believe you," he said simply, 3 words, but they nearly broke her. Matilda looked down, blinking back tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Samuel reached out slowly, giving her time to move away if she wished, and gently lifted her chin with his finger. "You deserved better than what this town has given you, Matilda Byrne." In the silver moonlight, his eyes were earnest, his face open and honest. Matilda felt something stir inside her, a feeling she'd thought died the night Frederick Whitmore attacked her. "Would you allow me to call on you properly?" Samuel asked. "Perhaps Sunday after church?" Matilda hesitated. "Are you sure? Your reputation is my own to risk," he finished firmly. "And I don't consider it a risk at all." A small, hopeful smile curved her lips. "Then yes, I'd like that very much." Samuel took her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Until Sunday, then." Matilda watched him walk away, her hand still tingling from his touch, wonder and confusion warring within her. For the first time in months, she felt something like hope fluttering in her chest. Sunday came with clear skies and a nervous flutter in Matilda's stomach. She wore her best dress to church, a deep blue that brought out her eyes, and tried to ignore the stares and whispers as she took her usual seat in the back pew. The service passed in a blur. Matilda was acutely aware of Samuel sitting several rows ahead with his brother Daniel and Daniel's wife, Emma. When Reverend Parker's sermon ended, she slipped out quickly, wanting to avoid the usual after-church socializing where she inevitably found herself isolated. She was halfway home when she heard footsteps behind her. Matilda. She turned to find Samuel, his Sunday best making him look even more handsome than she remembered. "I thought we might take a walk," he suggested. "It's a fine day for it." They strolled together toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open meadows dotted with spring wildflowers. Matilda was conscious of the curious eyes following them, but with each step away from town, she felt herself breathing easier. "Tell me about your family," Samuel said as they walked. "You mentioned your parents passed." Matilda nodded. 3 years ago, they had a small farm outside of Denver. After they died, I couldn't manage it alone, so I sold it and came here to work for Mrs. Harrison at the millinery. I'd always been good with a needle. She glanced at him. "What about you? I know you have a brother, but is there more family?" 5 brothers, actually. I'm the 4th. Our parents had a ranch near Santa Fe. When Pa died 6 years ago, we each took our share and went our separate ways. Daniel followed me here. He never could stand being too far from his older brother, Samuel said with a fond smile. The others scattered across the territory. "And your mother?" "Still in Santa Fe with my youngest brother, Joseph. He's running what's left of the family ranch." They reached a small stream, and Samuel helped Matilda across, his hand warm and steady. On the other side, they sat on a fallen log, the spring sun warming their faces. "I've been thinking about what you told me," Samuel said after a moment. "About Frederick Whitmore." Matilda tensed. "I'd rather not discuss it further." "I understand. I just wanted to say that what happened wasn't your fault, and you didn't deserve how this town has treated you." Matilda looked down at her hands. "It doesn't matter now. It's done." "It matters," Samuel insisted gently. "You matter, Matilda." She looked up at him then, searching his face for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She found none, only a steady, honest gaze that made her heart beat faster. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Being kind to me, defending me. You don't even know me." "I'd like to, though," he replied simply. "Know you, I mean, if you'll let me." Matilda studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I think I'd like that, too." The weeks that followed were a revelation for Matilda. Samuel called on her regularly, taking her for walks outside of town, bringing her wildflowers, and once, a beautiful piece of ribbon he'd bought in Denver for her to use in her hat making. The town's gossip didn't stop, but it changed in nature. Some speculated that Samuel was just after one thing, given Matilda's ruined reputation. Others wondered if he was simply naive or being taken advantage of by a woman desperate for security. Samuel paid it no mind, and gradually, Matilda learned to do the same. When they walked down the street together, he held her arm proudly. When they attended church, he sat beside her in her back pew rather than with his brother's family at the front, One warm evening in June, Samuel took Matilda to his ranch for the first time. It was modest compared to some, but well kept, a sturdy cabin, a barn, corrals, and pastureland stretching toward the mountains. "It's beautiful," Matilda said as Samuel helped her down from his wagon. "It's a work in progress," he replied with a smile, "but I have plans." He showed her around proudly the vegetable garden he'd started, the fruit trees he'd planted that wouldn't bear for years yet, the spring-fed pond where he hoped to raise some fish. "You're building something that will last," Matilda observed. Samuel's eyes met hers. "That's the idea." In the barn, he introduced her to the horses, including the wild stallion he'd been working with, a magnificent black animal with a white blaze down his face. "He's still not fully trusting, but he's coming around," Samuel explained, offering the horse an apple. "Sometimes, the ones that have been hurt the most just need patience and kindness to show their true nature." Matilda wasn't sure if they were still talking about the horse. As the sun began to set, they sat on the porch of Samuel's cabin, drinking coffee and watching the colors paint the mountains in the distance. "I've never brought a woman here before," Samuel said quietly. Matilda looked at him in surprise. "Never," he shook his head. "Never found one I wanted to share it with." The words hung between them, full of meaning. Matilda's heart raced as Samuel set down his coffee cup and turned to face her. "Matilda," he began, his voice low and serious, "I know it hasn't been long, but I want you to know that my intentions are honorable. I care for you deeply." She swallowed hard. "Samuel, you need to understand what you're taking on. The town will never fully accept me. There will always be talk." "Let them talk," he said firmly. "I know who you are, Matilda Byrne. You're kind and strong and honest. You've faced cruelty with dignity. You're the woman I want by my side." Tears welled in Matilda's eyes. "I care for you too," she whispered. "More than I thought I could care for anyone again." Samuel reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "May I kiss you?" he asked. Matilda nodded, and he leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a tender, reverent kiss that made her heart soar. When they parted, she saw in his eyes all the promises he wanted to make to her. "I should take you back to town," he said reluctantly as darkness fell. "But I'd like to bring you here again, often." Matilda smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I'd like that very much." As summer deepened, so did their relationship. Samuel was patient and gentle, never pushing for more than Matilda was ready to give. They rode together across his land, planned improvements to the ranch house, and talked about dreams they'd never shared with anyone else. In town, attitudes began to shift, if slowly. Samuel's brother Daniel and his wife Emma welcomed Matilda warmly, inviting her to Sunday dinners and treating her like family. A few of the townspeople, seeing Samuel's unwavering commitment, began to nod politely to Matilda again. Others, like the Whitmores, remained coldly hostile. Frederick had left town shortly after the incident, sent to manage some family business in Denver. But his parents made their disapproval clear whenever they encountered Matilda and Samuel together. One afternoon in late July, Matilda was working alone in the millinery shop when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up with a smile, expecting Samuel, who often stopped by during the day. Instead, she found herself face to face with Harriet Whitmore. "Mrs. Whitmore," Matilda said, her voice carefully neutral. "How may I help you?" The banker's wife looked around the shop with disdain. "Mrs. Harrison isn't here. She's visiting her daughter in Boulder. I'm managing the shop until she returns." Mrs. Whitmore's lips thinned. "I see. Well, I need a hat for the governor's ball in Denver next month. Something appropriate." Matilda nodded professionally, despite her racing heart. "Of course. Did you have a style in mind?" As they discussed designs and materials, Matilda maintained her composure, even as Mrs. Whitmore made cutting remarks about quality and taste. Finally, when measurements had been taken and details noted, Mrs. Whitmore fixed Matilda with a hard stare. "I understand you've been keeping company with Samuel Calloway." Matilda stiffened. "Mr. Calloway's affairs are his own, madam." A man like that could have his pick of respectable young women in this territory, Mrs. Whitmore continued, as if Matilda hadn't spoken. It would be a shame to see him throw away his prospects on someone with a questionable reputation. Anger flared in Matilda's chest. I believe Mr. Calloway is capable of making his own choices. Men can be easily misled, especially by women who know certain tricks. Mrs. Whitmore's implication was clear. My husband and I feel a certain responsibility to the community. Perhaps it would be best if you reconsidered your position here. Silver Creek might not be the right place for you anymore. Matilda's hands trembled, but she kept her voice steady. Are you suggesting I leave town, Mrs. Whitmore? I'm suggesting you consider what's best for everyone involved, including Mr. Calloway. With that, she turned and swept out of the shop, leaving Matilda standing alone among the colorful hats and ribbons, her hard-won confidence shaken. That evening, when Samuel came to take her for their usual walk, Matilda was quiet and withdrawn. They strolled to their favorite spot by the stream, and Samuel spread a blanket for them to sit on. Something's troubling you, he said, not a question but an observation. Matilda picked at a loose thread on her skirt. Mrs. Whitmore came to the shop today. Samuel's expression darkened. What did she say to you? That I should leave town, that I'm ruining your prospects? Matilda looked up at him, her eyes troubled. Maybe she's right, Samuel. You could have any woman in the territory, someone respectable without my history. Samuel took her hands in his. Matilda Byrne, look at me, he said firmly. I don't want any other woman. I want you with all your history, all your strength, all your beautiful resilience. But your future, my future is right here, he interrupted, squeezing her hands. With you, if you'll have me. Matilda's breath caught as Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment, he said, his voice husky with emotion. I thought maybe under the stars or by the mountains, but I realize now that the right moment is whenever you need to know how completely certain I am about us. He opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, a small sapphire flanked by tiny pearls. Matilda Byrne, I love you. I want to build a life with you, to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. Will you marry me? Tears spilled down Matilda's cheeks as she looked from the ring to Samuel's earnest face. Are you sure, truly sure? I have never been more certain of anything in my life, he replied without hesitation. Then yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. Samuel slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise of their future together. Matilda melted into him, her doubts washed away by the certainty of his love. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at Samuel's ranch. Reverend Parker officiated, and though only a handful of people attended Daniel and Emma, a few of Samuel's friends from neighboring ranches, and Mrs. Harrison, who had returned from Boulder, it was perfect in its simplicity and sincerity. Matilda wore a dress she had made herself, cream-colored with delicate blue embroidery that matched her eyes. Samuel couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him, her face radiant with happiness. You are the most beautiful sight I have ever seen, he whispered when she reached him. They spoke their vows beneath an arch of wildflowers, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days. When Reverend Parker pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel gathered Matilda in his arms and kissed her as their small group of well-wishers cheered. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with music and dancing and a feast prepared by Emma and Mrs. Harrison. As the sun set, the newlyweds thanked their guests and retreated to the cabin, their home now. Inside, Samuel had prepared a surprise. The main room was filled with candles, and wildflowers adorned every surface. On the table sat a small cake, a bottle of champagne, and 2 glasses. When did you do all this? Matilda asked, amazed. Daniel helped me this morning, Samuel admitted with a smile. I wanted everything to be perfect for you. Matilda turned to him, her heart full. It is perfect. You are perfect. Samuel shook his head, drawing her into his arms. Not perfect, just yours. That night, with tenderness and patience, Samuel showed Matilda what love between a man and a woman was meant to be: gentle, respectful, and deeply passionate. In his arms, the memory of Frederick's violence began to fade, replaced by Samuel's reverent touch and whispered words of adoration. Afterward, as they lay tangled together beneath the quilt, Matilda rested her head on Samuel's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could be this happy," she confessed. Samuel pressed a kiss to her hair. "This is just the beginning, my love, just the beginning." The weeks that followed were a sweet discovery as Matilda and Samuel adjusted to married life. Matilda continued working at the millinery shop, though now she rode into town with Samuel when he had business there and rode home with him in the evenings. She learned to cook on the ranch's wood stove, planted flowers around the cabin, and began to feel truly at home in town. Reactions to their marriage were mixed. Some, like Mrs. Harrison, were genuinely happy for them. Others maintained a cool distance, still judging Matilda for the scandal with Frederick Whitmore. The Whitmores themselves cut Matilda completely, refusing to acknowledge her existence even when business brought them face to face. Samuel remained steadfast, proudly introducing Matilda as his wife whenever they encountered someone new. His love and respect were a shield against the town's lingering disapproval. One evening in late September, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Matilda turned to Samuel with a nervous smile. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Samuel's face transformed with wonder. "A baby," he whispered. "You're certain?" Matilda nodded. "Dr. Matthews confirmed it yesterday. He says the baby should arrive in early spring." Samuel whooped with joy, lifting Matilda from her chair and spinning her around carefully before setting her back on her feet and dropping to his knees before her. He pressed his face to her stomach, his voice thick with emotion. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "You're Mama, and I can't wait to meet you." Matilda ran her fingers through his hair, her heart overflowing with love for this man who had given her not just a home and a name, but a future filled with hope. As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Matilda's condition became known in Silver Creek. Mrs. Harrison was delighted, already planning baby bonnets and booties. Emma, herself expecting a second child, shared advice and comfort as Matilda dealt with morning sickness and fatigue. But not everyone shared in their joy. The whispers started again, crueler this time. "Barely married 2 months and already with child. Makes you wonder if Whitmore wasn't telling the truth about her all along." Poor Samuel Calloway, trapped with a woman like that. And now a baby that might not even be his. The rumors reached Matilda's ears despite Samuel's efforts to shield her. They cut deeply, poisoning what should have been a joyful time. "Don't listen to them," Samuel urged when he found her crying one evening after a particularly difficult day in town. "We know the truth. That's all that matters." "But they're questioning whether the baby is even yours," Matilda said, her voice breaking. "How can you bear it?" Samuel gathered her close. "Because I know it's nonsense, because I love you and I love our child already." "The rest is just noise, Matilda." His faith in her was unwavering, but Matilda worried that the constant cloud of suspicion would eventually wear him down. She began to withdraw, making excuses to stay at the ranch rather than accompany Samuel to town. She wrote to Mrs. Harrison, resigning from her position at the millinery shop. Samuel watched her retreat with growing concern. One crisp October morning, he came in from the barn to find Matilda sitting at the table, staring out the window with a faraway look. "Get your coat," he said decisively. Matilda looked up, startled. "What? Why?" "Because we're going to the town dance tonight." Matilda shook her head. "Samuel, no, I can't face them all, not with these rumors. That's exactly why we're going," he interrupted gently. "We can't hide away and let them win, Matilda. We have nothing to be ashamed of." She looked at him doubtfully. "The dance is where all this started, where people first saw us together. And it's where they'll see us now happy, expecting a child, building our life together despite their cruelty." He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I'm proud to be your husband, Matilda. I want to dance with my beautiful wife in front of the entire town." His confidence bolstered her, and that evening, Matilda found herself back in the same hall where Samuel had first asked her to dance months before. She wore a new dress, one she'd made herself that accommodated her slightly rounded figure, in a deep green that made her eyes shine. The whispers started as soon as they entered, but Samuel kept his arm firmly around her waist, his head high as he led her straight to the dance floor. "Remember the first time we danced?" he asked as he took her in his arms. Matilda nodded, relaxing into his embrace as the music began. "You were so kind to me, even then." "It wasn't kindness," he reminded her with a smile. "I wanted to dance with the most beautiful woman in the room." They moved together gracefully, and Matilda gradually became aware that not everyone was watching them with judgment. Emma and Daniel smiled encouragingly from across the room. Mrs. Harrison beamed proudly. Even a few of the townspeople who had once turned their backs on Matilda now nodded politely. As the evening progressed, Matilda began to enjoy herself despite the occasional pointed looks and whispered comments. Samuel kept her close, getting her punch when she was thirsty, making her laugh with observations about the other dancers. They were preparing to leave when the hall's doors opened and Frederick Whitmore walked in. Matilda froze, her hand tightening on Samuel's arm. Frederick had been away in Denver for months, and his sudden reappearance sent a chill through her. He looked much the same handsome in an obvious way, with the self-assured stance of a man who had never faced consequences for his actions. His eyes scanned the room and landed on Matilda. A slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face as he noted her condition. "Steady," Samuel murmured, his hand covering hers. "We're leaving now." They had almost reached the door when Frederick stepped into their path. "Well, well," he drawled, his eyes moving insolently over Matilda. "Mrs. Calloway, I hear, and expecting already. My congratulations." Matilda couldn't speak, her throat tight with fear and anger. Samuel stepped slightly in front of her, his voice low but clear. "Thank you. Now, if you'll excuse us." Frederick didn't move. "I must say, Calloway, you work fast, or perhaps the work was already done for you." His implication hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. The hall had gone quiet, everyone watching the confrontation. Samuel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. "Mr. Whitmore, I suggest you step aside and keep your insinuations to yourself." Frederick smirked. "Just making conversation. After all, Matilda and I have history." "History," Samuel repeated, his tone dangerous now. "Is that what you call forcing yourself on an innocent woman and then lying about it?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Frederick's face darkened. "Watch your mouth, Calloway." "Everyone knows what kind of woman you married." "Yes, they do," Samuel replied steadily. "She's the kind of woman who gets up every day and faces this town with dignity despite how unfairly she's been treated. She's the kind of woman who still has kindness in her heart after everything that's been done to her. She's the mother of my child, and she's worth 100 of you." Frederick's hand moved to his belt, where a pistol was holstered. "You're calling me a liar." "I'm calling you exactly what you are," Samuel said, not backing down an inch. The tension in the room was palpable. Matilda stepped forward, placing a hand on Samuel's arm. "Samuel, please, he's not worth it." She turned to Frederick, finding courage she didn't know she had. "You've done enough damage, Frederick. Leave us alone." Frederick's eyes narrowed. "You've got some nerve speaking to me like that after what you tried to pull." "What I tried to pull?" Matilda's voice rose slightly. "You attacked me. You forced yourself on me. And when your father caught us, you lied to save yourself and let me be ruined." Several people gasped. Mrs. Whitmore, who had been watching from across the room, pushed through the crowd. "How dare you speak such filth about my son?" she hissed at Matilda. "It's the truth," Matilda replied, her voice steady now. "Ask him. Ask him to swear on the Bible that he didn't force himself on me." Frederick's face flushed, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "She's telling the truth." All heads turned to see Mary Jenkins, a quiet young woman who worked as a seamstress at the general store. "I saw him that night," Mary continued, her voice shaking slightly. "I was working late, and I saw Frederick go into the millinery shop. He was drunk. Later, I heard," she swallowed hard. "I heard Matilda crying out for help, but I was too afraid to do anything. When Mr. Whitmore arrived, I heard Frederick lie about what happened." Stunned silence filled the hall. Frederick's face contorted with rage. "You're lying," he snarled at Mary. "No," Mary replied, gaining confidence. "I'm not, and I've regretted my silence every day since. I'm sorry, Matilda, I should have spoken up sooner." Mrs. Whitmore looked as though she'd been slapped. "This is absurd. Frederick would never, he would, and he did," another voice said. It was Thomas Reed, the blacksmith. "And it wasn't the first time. My daughter Alice had a similar experience with him 2 years ago. We kept quiet because we knew no one would believe us against a Whitmore." One by one, other voices joined in, people who had witnessed Frederick's predatory behavior over the years, who had stayed silent out of fear or a belief that they wouldn't be heard. Frederick's face had gone from red to white. He backed away, looking frantically around the room as the tide of public opinion visibly turned against him. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "You're all just jealous of my family's position." "Your family's position won't protect you anymore," Samuel said quietly. "Not now that people know the truth." Frederick's hand moved to his gun, but before he could draw it, Daniel Calloway was behind him, his own pistol pressed to Frederick's back. "I wouldn't," Daniel advised calmly. "Now, I think it's time you left town, Whitmore, tonight." Mr. Whitmore pushed through the crowd, his face thunderous. "Take your hands off my son." "Your son is lucky he's not being arrested," Samuel replied evenly. "But if he's still in Silver Creek by morning, I'll personally see that charges are filed against him." The banker looked around the room, seeing the changed expressions on the townspeople's faces. For the first time, the Whitmore name carried no weight. "Come, Frederick," he said stiffly. "We're leaving." As the Whitmores made their way to the door, Mr. Whitmore stopped in front of Matilda. For a moment, it seemed he might speak, but instead he merely lowered his eyes and continued on. In the silence that followed their departure, Matilda felt light-headed with shock and relief. Samuel's arm around her waist steadied her. "Are you all right?" he murmured. Matilda nodded, unable to speak. Around them, the townspeople were processing what they had just witnessed, many looking at Matilda with new understanding and regret. Mrs. Harrison approached first, taking Matilda's hands in hers. "My dear, I always believed you," she said, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry you had to endure all this." Others followed Mary Jenkins with a tearful apology, Thomas Reed offering gruff but sincere words of support, even Reverend Parker acknowledging that a grave injustice had been done. Emma pushed through the crowd, her face concerned. "You look pale, Matilda. Samuel should take you home." Samuel nodded, gathering Matilda close. "Come, love, you've had enough excitement for one evening." As they made their way to the door, the townspeople parted respectfully. Some nodded, some murmured apologies, some simply watched with new awareness. Matilda walked with her head high, Samuel's solid presence beside her a reminder that whatever happened next, she was no longer alone. Outside, the night air was cool and refreshing. Samuel helped Matilda into their wagon and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders before climbing up beside her. "Are you truly all right?" he asked once they were on the road, the lights of town receding behind them. Matilda considered the question. "I think I will be," she said finally. "I never thought I'd see the day when people would know the truth." Samuel took her hand, pressing it to his lips. "You were so brave in there." "I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified." She leaned against his shoulder. "But when he started threatening you, something changed." "I couldn't let him hurt you too." "That's what love does," Samuel said softly. "It gives us courage we didn't know we had." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the stars brilliant above them, the rhythmic sound of the horses' hooves soothing. What do you think will happen now?" Matilda asked eventually. Samuel considered. "Frederick will leave town if he's wise. The Whitmores will probably go too eventually. Their power here is broken. And the town, people will come around. Some already have. The truth has a way of clearing the air." Matilda placed a hand on her growing belly, feeling a flutter of movement. "Do you think our child will be able to grow up here without the shadow of all this?" Samuel covered her hand with his own. "Our child will grow up knowing their mother is the strongest, most honorable woman I've ever known. Whatever shadows remain, we'll face them together." When they reached the ranch, Samuel lifted Matilda from the wagon with careful hands and carried her inside despite her protests that she could walk perfectly well. "Humor me," he said, setting her gently on their bed. "It's been a long night." He built up the fire and brought her a cup of warm milk with honey, then sat beside her, stroking her hair as she sipped it. "I love you, Matilda Calloway," he said, his voice tender. "More than I can ever say." Matilda set the cup aside and drew him down beside her. "Then show me," she whispered. In the warm glow of the firelight, they found solace and celebration in each other's arms, reaffirming the bond between them that had weathered so much and emerged stronger. The months that followed brought profound changes to Silver Creek and to the Calloways. True to Samuel's prediction, the Whitmores left town shortly after the dance, selling their bank to an investor from Denver and moving east. Frederick was reportedly sent to California, where the family name wasn't associated with scandal. In town, attitudes toward Matilda shifted dramatically. People who had once crossed the street to avoid her now greeted her warmly. Mrs. Harrison begged her to return to the millinery shop, though Matilda declined, preferring to focus on preparing for the baby's arrival. Instead, she began taking in special orders for wedding dresses and christening gowns, working from home at her own pace. Mary Jenkins became a frequent visitor to the ranch, her initial guilt over her silence transforming into a genuine friendship with Matilda. Together with Emma, they formed a sewing circle that met weekly, creating layettes for Matilda's baby and Emma's second child, due just a month later. As winter settled over Colorado, Matilda's belly grew round and full. Samuel treated her like precious glass, insisting she rest often and taking over many of her chores despite her protests. "I'm pregnant, not ill," she would remind him with a laugh. "You're creating life," he would counter, kissing her soundly. "That's more important than any work around here." Christmas came with a heavy snowfall that transformed the landscape into a pristine wonderland. Samuel surprised Matilda with a beautiful cradle he had crafted himself from pine, its surface smooth and polished, with delicate carvings of wildflowers around the edge. "It's beautiful," Matilda whispered, running her fingers over the workmanship. "When did you find time to make this?" "I worked on it at night after you fell asleep," Samuel admitted. "I wanted our child to have something made with love." Matilda's gift to him was a quilt she had pieced together from scraps of fabric, each square holding significance a bit of her wedding dress. A piece of the shirt he'd worn when he proposed, material from the first dress she'd made after coming to Silver Creek. "So we'll always remember how our story began," she explained as he examined each square with wonder. They celebrated the holiday quietly, just the two of them, though Daniel and Emma joined them for Christmas dinner. As they sat by the fire that evening, Matilda felt the baby move strongly, a foot or elbow pressing visibly against her stomach. "Look," she said, taking Samuel's hand and placing it where the baby was active. "Someone's eager to join the celebration." Samuel's face lit up with awe as he felt the movement beneath his palm. "Hello there, little one," he murmured. "Your mama and I can't wait to meet you." As January turned to February, Matilda grew increasingly uncomfortable. Her back ached constantly, and sleep became elusive as the baby seemed determined to practice somersaults whenever she lay down. "Not much longer now," Dr. Matthews reassured her during a checkup. "Everything looks to be progressing perfectly." Samuel hired a young woman from town, Bessie Turner, to help around the house and stay with Matilda when he needed to work with the horses. Bessie was cheerful and capable, and Matilda appreciated both her practical assistance and her company during the long winter days. March arrived with the first hints of spring crocuses pushing through the melting snow, longer days, and the return of birdsong. Matilda was sitting on the porch one afternoon, enjoying the sunshine, when the first pain gripped her. She gasped, her hand going to her belly. Bessie, who had been hanging laundry nearby, hurried over. "Mrs. Calloway, are you all right?" Matilda nodded as the pain subsided. "I think it might be starting. Would you find Samuel? He's in the south pasture with the new foal." Bessie hurried off, and Matilda closed her eyes, breathing deeply as another contraction began. By the time Samuel came racing up to the house, his face a mask of concern, the pains were coming regularly. "Let's get you inside," he said, helping her to her feet. "Bessie, can you ride?" Matilda asked. When the girl nodded, Matilda continued, "Take the bay mare and fetch Dr. Matthews. Tell him it's time." As Bessie galloped off toward town, Samuel helped Matilda to their bedroom and sent a ranch hand to bring Emma, who had promised to help when the time came. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and effort for Matilda. Dr. Matthews arrived in time to oversee the birth, with Emma providing experienced support and comfort. Samuel refused to leave Matilda's side, holding her hand through each contraction, wiping her brow and murmuring words of encouragement. "You're the strongest woman I know," he told her as she struggled through a particularly difficult contraction. "You can do this, Matilda. I'm right here with you." As dawn broke on March 5, 1884, Matilda gave a final, tremendous push, and their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry. "A girl," Dr. Matthews announced, placing the squalling infant on Matilda's chest. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Matilda gazed down at the tiny red face, the shock of dark hair, the perfectly formed fingers that curled around her own, and felt a love so powerful it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Samuel sat on the edge of the bed, his face awestruck as he stroked the baby's cheek with one gentle finger. "She's perfect," he said, his voice breaking. "Just like her mother." They named her Grace Elizabeth Calloway Grace for the blessing she represented in their lives, and Elizabeth after Samuel's mother. She had Matilda's blue eyes and Samuel's dark hair, and a strong set of lungs that she exercised frequently. The first weeks of Grace's life passed in a haze of exhaustion and joy. Samuel proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Grace when she was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, watching in wonder as Matilda nursed their daughter. "I never knew I could love someone so much," he confessed one night as they stood together over Grace's cradle, watching her sleep. "Both of you, sometimes I think my heart will burst with it." Matilda leaned against him, content in a way she had never thought possible. "A year ago, I was alone and despised. Now I have everything I could ever want." When Grace was a month old, they took her to church to be baptized. The little white gown Matilda had sewn for her was trimmed with lace and tiny embroidered flowers. As Reverend Parker poured the water over Grace's head, Matilda looked out at the congregation faces that had once been closed to her, now smiling with genuine warmth. After the service, people gathered around to admire the baby, offering congratulations and small gifts. Mary Jenkins had made a beautiful bonnet, Mrs. Harrison brought a silver rattle, and even Thomas Reed, the gruff blacksmith, presented a tiny horseshoe for luck. "It's quite a change," Emma observed as she and Matilda sat together, watching Samuel proudly show Grace to a group of ranchers. "The way people treat you now." "It is," Matilda agreed, "though I find I care less about it than I once did. The people who matter stood by me when it wasn't easy, the rest." She shrugged. "Their opinions seem less important now." As spring blossomed into summer, life settled into a new rhythm at the Calloway Ranch. Grace thrived, growing plump and active. Matilda gradually resumed her sewing work, creating beautiful garments while Grace napped or played nearby. Samuel expanded his horse training business, his reputation drawing clients from as far away as Denver. On warm evenings, they would sit on the porch, Grace sleeping in Samuel's arms as Matilda read aloud from one of their favorite books. Sometimes Daniel and Emma would visit with their children, the cousins being raised almost as siblings. One Sunday in August, as they drove home from church, Samuel took an unexpected turn away from the ranch. "Where are we going?" Matilda asked, adjusting Grace on her lap. "I want to show you something," Samuel replied with a smile. He drove to a meadow on the eastern edge of their property, where a small stream cut through rich grassland. Wildflowers dotted the landscape, and in the distance, the mountains rose against a clear blue sky. "It's beautiful here," Matilda said, as Samuel helped her down from the wagon, Grace cradled in one arm. "I've been thinking," Samuel said, leading her to a spot where the view was particularly fine. "Our cabin is getting a bit small for us, especially as Grace grows. And if we're blessed with more children." Matilda looked at him in surprise. "Are you suggesting we build a new house?" Samuel nodded, his eyes bright with excitement. "Right here. I've been working with a builder from Denver. 2 stories, with a proper kitchen for you, a nursery for Grace and any siblings that might come along, a sewing room with good light." He paused, suddenly uncertain. "What do you think?" Matilda looked around, imagining it a proper family home, built on land that was theirs, with room to grow and flourish. "I think it's perfect," she said, her voice soft with emotion. "A new beginning." "Not a beginning," Samuel corrected gently. "A continuation, another chapter in our story." He took Grace from her arms and bounced the baby gently, making her laugh. "What do you think, little miss? Would you like a big house with a garden and maybe a brother or sister to play with someday?" Grace gurgled happily, reaching for her father's face with tiny hands. "I think that's a yes," Matilda laughed, her heart full as she watched the 2 people she loved most in the world. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the meadow, Samuel pulled Matilda close, Grace nestled between them. "A year ago, I asked you to dance," he murmured against her hair. "Best decision I ever made." Matilda smiled up at him, remembering that night how lost she had felt, how unexpected his kindness had been, how impossible it had seemed then that they would be standing here now, a family. "I was so alone before you," she said softly. "You saw me when no one else would look." "I saw you," Samuel agreed. "And I've never stopped seeing you, Matilda Calloway, the real you, brave and kind and strong, the woman I fall in love with more deeply every day." As they stood together in the fading light, planning their future on land that would nurture their growing family, Matilda reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the darkest moment of her life had come this unexpected joy, a husband who cherished her, a daughter who was the physical embodiment of their love, a community that had finally recognized the truth. The whispers that had once followed her had faded into silence, replaced by the sound of Grace's laughter, Samuel's words of love, the promise of more children to come. The dance where she had once been mocked as ruined had led to this a life richer and more fulfilling than she had ever dared to dream. As if reading her thoughts, Samuel pressed a kiss to her forehead. "No regrets?" he asked. Matilda looked up at him, this man who had chosen her when no one else would, who had given her not just his name but his heart, who had believed in her without question or hesitation. "Not one," she replied with perfect truth. "Every step led me to you, to Grace, to this life we're building." "How could I regret any of it?" Samuel smiled, the love in his eyes as clear and true as it had been the first time he asked her to dance. "Then let's go home, Mrs. Calloway. We have a future to plan." With Grace cradled between them, they walked back to the wagon, the first stars appearing in the twilight sky above them. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, a family forged in adversity, strengthened by love, and blessed beyond measure. And as they drove toward home, Matilda knew with absolute certainty that the whispers of the past no longer had any power over her. She was Matilda Calloway, now beloved wife, devoted mother, A woman who had found her true worth in the eyes of the man who had seen her clearly from the very beginning.